Imagine waking up before sunrise. The world outside your window is completely white. Snow covers the fields, the roads, the rooftops. Everything is silent. Then you notice something strange. There are footprints outside your house. At first, you assume they're from a horse or a donkey, maybe a dog, but then you look closer. The footprints are almost perfectly identical, and they're traveling in a straight line, one after another, one after another. You follow them across the garden. They continue over a wall, then across a rooftop, down the other side, and into the next field. You keep following, but the footprints don't stop. They continue for miles, and nobody can explain what made them. No animal seems capable of leaving them. No human being could have walked that way. And the strangest part, you're not the only person who has found them. Hundreds of people across the English county of Devon are waking up to the same thing. A mysterious trail of hoof-shaped marks stretching through the snow. Some people call them animal tracks. Others call them a hoax. But in the terrified villages of Devon, there is another name, the Devil's Footprints. And for a short time in February of 1855, people genuinely feared that something had crossed the English countryside during the night, something they couldn't see, something that didn't seem to care about walls, buildings, or distance. And more than 170 years later, we still don't know exactly what happened. February 1855, Devon, England. This is one of those mysteries where the legend has become so famous that it's difficult to separate what actually happened from what people later claimed happened. And that's important, because there really was a strange event. There really was snow. There really were unusual tracks, and newspapers really did report them. But some of the most incredible details surrounding the story are based on second-hand accounts, later retellings, and claims that were never independently verified. The mystery isn't simply, did the devil walk through Devon? It's much more interesting than that. What caused the footprints? Why did people interpret them as supernatural? Why did supposedly impossible details appear in newspapers? And how did a few strange tracks become one of Britain's most famous paranormal legends? Tonight, we're going back to the winter of 1855, to a quiet English countryside buried beneath snow, and to the morning when people looked outside and realized something had been walking through the night. It began during the night of February 8th into the morning of February 9th, 1855. A heavy snowfall had covered parts of Devon. By morning, the countryside looked completely different. Fields were white, garden walls were covered, roads disappeared beneath fresh snow, and across parts of East and South Devon, people began noticing something unusual. Tracks, not normal footprints. They were described as small hoof-like impressions. Many reports described them as roughly 4 inches long and around 3 inches wide, although measurements varied. Some accounts said the prints were separated by only several inches. Others described wider spacing, but one feature kept appearing in the reports. The tracks seemed to form a single line, not the alternating left-right pattern you'd expect from an ordinary 4-legged animal. Just one impression, then another, almost as if something had been hopping or walking with only one foot touching the ground. And then came the detail that transformed a strange animal track into a mystery. The footprints seemed to appear in places where an ordinary animal shouldn't have been able to go, across gardens, over walls, around buildings, and, according to some reports, even across rooftops. The story spread quickly. People began comparing what they had seen. Villages that had no obvious connection were reporting similar marks. And in a 19th century community, where nights were dark and communication was slow, that kind of story could become terrifying very quickly, because there was no internet, no television, no instant photographs, no way to immediately check what someone hundreds of yards away had seen. Instead, people had rumors, and rumors travel surprisingly well, especially when they're carried by fear. Within days, the strange footprints had become a local sensation. People searched through the snow, trying to determine where the tracks came from. Some followed them, others examined the impressions, and eventually, the most frightening explanation began circulating. Perhaps they weren't animal tracks at all. Perhaps they belonged to something supernatural, the devil, or one of his servants. To modern ears, that may sound extreme, but Victorian Britain had a complicated relationship with folklore, religion, superstition, and the unexplained. And the timing couldn't have been better for a legend. The countryside was covered in snow, the nights were long, the roads were difficult, and the tracks seemed to defy common sense. According to later accounts, some villagers became frightened enough that they were reluctant to go outside after dark. One clergyman, Reverend G. M. Musgrave, later explained that he had even mentioned a different explanation, kangaroos, partly to distract people from the growing belief that the devil was responsible. But that kangaroo story was not evidence of escaped animals. Musgrave himself acknowledged that it was essentially something he introduced to redirect frightened villagers away from supernatural ideas. So already, we're seeing something important. The mystery wasn't just about footprints. It was about how people react when they encounter something they cannot immediately explain. And once fear enters the story, every new detail becomes more frightening. A footprint becomes a warning, a strange shape becomes evidence, and an unexplained event becomes a legend. But then the story escaped Devon, and everything became much bigger. In February of 1855, Britain had something that could transform a local mystery almost overnight. Newspapers, and one of the most influential publications of the time, was the Illustrated London News. Reports about the mysterious footprints eventually reached its pages. One particularly influential account described the marks as being approximately 4 inches long and 2 3/4 inches wide. They were described as appearing in a single line. The account claimed that the prints appeared remarkably consistent across different locations. And then came the extraordinary claims. The trail was said to cover an enormous distance. Some reports suggested a route stretching for many miles across Devon. Later retellings would inflate the journey to roughly 100 miles. The story became almost impossible to imagine. One mysterious creature crossing an entire region during a single winter night and apparently ignoring obstacles. But there's a problem. When historians examine the surviving evidence, the famous 100-mile trail becomes much less certain. There is no surviving scientific survey proving that one continuous trail covered 100 miles. There isn't a preserved line of footprints that investigators can examine today. And the reports themselves were not always consistent. Different witnesses describe different shapes, different sizes, different routes, different spacing, and different circumstances. That doesn't mean the event was invented. It means the famous version of the story may have been assembled from multiple reports. Separate tracks seen in different places gradually became one enormous mystery. And once newspapers began repeating the story, the legend developed a life of its own. But there was still one problem nobody could ignore: what had actually made the tracks. One of the most fascinating things about the devil's footprints is that people didn't immediately abandon reason. They tried to solve it. One of the most prominent figures to enter the debate was Richard Owen. Owen was a major Victorian naturalist and an important figure in 19th century science. His explanation: badgers. It sounds almost disappointingly ordinary, but Owen had a reason. Badgers are nocturnal. They are powerful animals, and their feet can leave impressions that are surprisingly large compared with the animal itself. Owen suggested that severe winter conditions could potentially encourage unusual movement. But there was an obvious problem. A badger might explain some strange footprints. It didn't explain every detail of the story, especially the alleged long-distance trail, and certainly not the more extraordinary reports of tracks appearing across walls and rooftops. Still, the badger theory was important because it showed something that would continue throughout the mystery. Whenever someone proposed a supernatural explanation, someone else searched for a natural one, and the debate continued. But then another possibility appeared, one that sounds ridiculous until you actually look at the footprints. Mice. In March 1855, a man named Thomas Fox submitted illustrations to the Illustrated London News. His idea was surprisingly simple: hopping rodents. When a small animal moves through snow by jumping, its front and rear feet can land in patterns that are very different from the animal's normal walking footprints. Under certain conditions, a series of small impressions can merge visually. The result can resemble something completely different, even a tiny hoof, and that raises an unsettling possibility. What if some of the devil's footprints weren't footprints in the traditional sense at all? What if they were distorted traces left by ordinary animals? Snow is deceptive. A fresh layer can preserve an impression beautifully, but temperature changes can alter it. Melting can enlarge edges. Refreezing can harden strange shapes. Wind can erase details. And overlapping tracks can become one mysterious-looking impression. So a tiny animal moving through the right kind of snow could potentially leave something that looks much stranger than the animal itself. This theory doesn't solve the entire mystery, but it demonstrates something crucial. The human eye doesn't always see what actually happened, it sees patterns. And when we're frightened, our brains become very good at finding meaning in those patterns. A hoof, a face, a figure in the darkness, or the footprint of the devil. But there was another problem. Some witnesses claimed the tracks crossed places where animals supposedly couldn't have gone. And that's where the story gets much stranger. Imagine standing outside your house in 1855. There's snow everywhere. You discover a trail of strange marks. You follow it, and suddenly it reaches a wall, not a small garden border, a substantial obstacle. Yet on the other side, the marks continue, so you follow them again, and they appear to cross another obstacle, then another. Some contemporary reports claim the tracks appeared on rooftops and even seemed to cross high walls. One account described walls around 14 feet high. These claims are among the reasons the devil's footprints became famous. Because an ordinary animal leaving strange tracks is interesting, an animal that apparently ignores gravity is terrifying. But here's where factual caution matters. Those obstacle crossing claims come primarily from newspaper correspondence and later retellings. They were not documented through modern forensic investigation. There are no surviving photographs showing an impossible creature walking across a roof, no preserved tracks, no physical evidence proving that one animal crossed every reported obstacle. And this is where the mystery becomes almost philosophical. Suppose someone sees something genuinely strange, they tell another person, that person tells a newspaper. The newspaper publishes it, someone else reads it. Years later, a writer summarizes it, and decades after that, someone retells the story online. At every stage, the story can become slightly more dramatic. The wall gets higher, the trail gets longer, the footprints become more perfect, the creature becomes more impossible, until eventually, the legend is no longer identical to the original event. And yet, something still happened. Something caused people across Devon to look at the snow and become frightened. The question is, what? One of the strangest theories connected to the mystery was the idea that two kangaroos had escaped from a private menagerie near Sidmouth. Kangaroos would certainly explain one part of the mystery. They hop, and their movements can leave unusual tracks. But there was an obvious problem. There was no reliable confirmation that the kangaroos had escaped. And how would they have crossed the Exe estuary? The Reverend Musgrave later explained that the kangaroo story had been useful because people were becoming genuinely frightened. In other words, he wasn't necessarily claiming that kangaroos had solved the mystery. He was trying to give people something else to talk about, something absurd, but less frightening than Satan walking through the countryside. It's almost darkly funny. A mysterious footprint appears. People become convinced the devil is nearby, and the local solution becomes, maybe there are kangaroos. But beneath the humor is something deeply human. When people encounter uncertainty, they desperately want an explanation. Even a ridiculous explanation can feel better than no explanation at all, because uncertainty creates fear, and fear hates empty spaces. It fills them. Decades later, another theory emerged: a balloon. More specifically, the possibility that some of the marks could have been created by equipment trailing behind a balloon. The theory suggested that a balloon or its ropes could have dragged through the snow and created repeated impressions. It's an imaginative explanation, and it might account for certain strange shapes, but again, it doesn't explain everything. A balloon dragged by the wind would be expected to encounter trees, buildings, walls, other obstacles. Its ropes and equipment could become tangled, and there is no definitive evidence proving that a balloon created the mysterious tracks. So once again, the theory works for some details, but struggles with others, and that's a pattern you'll see again and again. Every explanation seems to solve one piece of the puzzle. Then another piece refuses to fit. Badgers, mice, kangaroos, balloons, weather, human error, hoaxes. Each one explains something, none explains everything, and that is exactly what keeps this mystery alive. There's another reason the devil's footprints remain so fascinating. The original evidence is frustratingly incomplete. Much of what we know comes from newspapers, and newspapers are not forensic reports. They contain letters, eyewitness descriptions, rumors, editorial choices, and sometimes speculation. There was, however, one remarkable surviving collection of material. In the 20th century, researchers looking back into the mystery discovered papers associated with Reverend Henry Thomas Ellicombe, who had been vicar of Christ St. George during the period. The material included letters and tracings connected with the footprints. A draft letter to the Illustrated London News was also discovered. The existence of those papers gives us something valuable, a glimpse into what people were actually recording at the time. And those records suggest that the footprints were not necessarily as uniform as the popular legend makes them sound. Different impressions could look different. Different locations produce different reports. That matters enormously, because if the tracks weren't identical, then perhaps there was never one creature. Perhaps there were multiple causes, different animals, different environmental conditions, different kinds of tracks, all appearing after the same snowfall, and then being connected by human imagination. But there's an even more disturbing possibility. What if the mystery became impossible to solve because the original evidence disappeared almost immediately? Snow melts, footprints vanish, witnesses forget, newspapers move on, and eventually, the only thing left is the story. There is something psychologically fascinating about this case. Imagine living in rural Devon in 1855. At night, your world is almost completely dark. There are no electric streetlights, no smartphones, no security cameras, no weather radar, no instant communication. Your knowledge of the world is limited by what you personally experience and what you hear from other people. Then one morning, someone tells you the devil has left footprints outside the village. You look outside and you see them. At that moment, your brain doesn't approach the tracks like a laboratory scientist. It asks a different question. What could have made this? And if everyone around you is already talking about the devil, that idea becomes part of the answer. This is not stupidity, it's human psychology. We interpret ambiguous information using context. If you're told there's a person hiding in the forest, a shadow becomes a person. If you're told there's a monster in the lake, a ripple becomes evidence. And if you're told the devil has walked across the snow, A strange animal track can become something supernatural. The footprints may have been real, the fear was definitely real, but the interpretation, that is much harder to prove. At this point, we can separate the story into three categories. First, what is reasonably supported. There was significant snowfall in Devon in February 1855. Unusual tracks were reported across multiple locations. Contemporary newspapers documented the mystery. People seriously debated possible explanations, and the story became a genuine local and national sensation. Second, what was reported but never proven, that the tracks formed one continuous trail, that they covered roughly 100 miles, that one creature produced all of them, that they crossed every reported wall and rooftop, and that they were physically impossible. Those claims exist in the historical record, but that doesn't mean they were verified. And third, the supernatural explanation. There is no verified evidence that the devil, a demon, or any supernatural creature created the tracks. That remains folklore. But folklore doesn't need to be true to be powerful. Sometimes the most enduring ghost stories begin with something ordinary. A strange noise, a shadow, a footprint, a mistake, a coincidence, and then someone asks the question that changes everything. What if? Maybe that is the real mystery. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, what creature made the devil's footprints? Perhaps we should ask, how many different things made them? The footprints were reported across a large area. Different witnesses saw different forms. Different theories emerged, and environmental conditions could have altered tracks dramatically. A mouse could leave one pattern, a badger another. Weather could distort both. Then people could interpret those marks as connected. The newspaper could combine reports, and eventually a single creature appears in the story. A creature that doesn't really exist anywhere except inside the narrative. This possibility may be less supernatural, but in a strange way, it's more unsettling, because it means the monster might not have been hiding in the snow. The monster might have been the mystery itself, a blank space in our understanding, filled by imagination. The snow of Devon eventually melted. The strange tracks vanished. The frightened villagers returned to their lives. The newspapers moved on to other stories. And yet, the footprints never really disappeared. They survived in books, in newspaper archives, in folklore, in paranormal investigations. And eventually, on the internet, every generation has retold the story, and every generation has added another layer. The devil's footprints are now remembered as one of the great unexplained mysteries of 19th century Britain. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. There were footprints, there were witnesses, there was fear, there were competing explanations, and there was never a definitive answer. The natural explanations are plausible. Perhaps small animals created some of the impressions. Perhaps badgers or other creatures created others. Perhaps snow and weather transformed ordinary tracks into extraordinary shapes. Perhaps human beings connected separate trails into one story. Perhaps some of the reported details were simply mistaken, and perhaps some part of the mystery still sits inside the gaps between those explanations. Because that's what makes mysteries like this so difficult to forget. Not the answer, the absence of one. Think about that morning in 1855. You wake up, you open the door, snow stretches across the ground, and there, just outside your house, is a perfect line of strange footprints. You don't know what made them, you don't know where they came from, and you don't know where they're going, so you follow them, across the garden, across the field, toward the distant hills, and eventually, you realize something. The footprints aren't getting closer to you, they're leading you away from everything familiar, into the silent countryside, and for a moment, you wonder whether you should keep following or turn around. Because maybe the frightening part isn't discovering that something impossible walked through the snow. Maybe the frightening part is never knowing what was walking there at all. So, If you woke up tomorrow morning and found a trail of footprints outside your home, perfectly spaced, perfectly silent, and disappearing into the darkness, would you follow them? Or would you close the door and pretend you never saw them? If you enjoy true mysteries, historical legends, unexplained events, and stories where fact and folklore collide, subscribe for more. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories aren't the ones we can prove. They're the ones that leave just enough evidence to make us wonder. Until next time, keep the lights on and sleep carefully.